last day. Joining me is my panel, Liberal Democrats Federal Board member Callum Robertson, former Labour advisor Matthew Larser, and former aide to Margaret Thatcher, Niall Gardner. Goodness me, Matthew, we're going to have to start with you. The Labour Party has won an election for the first time since 2005.
Absolutely, and so, you know, we've been there, we've lived those days of disappointment, and so it's great that we've got a Labour government. But as you say, Tom, it's one that wasn't elected on a particularly large percentage of the vote, even though it's going to have a very large majority in the House of Commons. So I thought what Keir said in his speech outside Downing Street was absolutely vital, which is this is going to be a government for all of the people and not just those who voted Labour yesterday. And it's going to be a government that's got to deliver on the bread and butter issues that people care about. So those are the two challenges going forward, which the new cabinet, which is pretty much the old shadow cabinet, with, I've just noticed that Emily Thornberry has not been appointed as Attorney General. Instead, a KC who's not either house currently, who's just been appointed.
So that will be a new member of the House of Lords and of course, Sir Keir Starmer, an eminent lawyer in his own right, will probably have had thoughts about who he wanted to appoint to that position.
He knows his lawyers.
And he was Ed Miliband going to win the 2015 election? He would have been Attorney General in Ed Miliband's first cabinet, so say all sorts of reports.
No, that's pretty.
Niall, this is a crisis moment for Conservatism in the United Kingdom, because yes, we can say that the Labour Party has won on a very low share of the vote, but the reason why they've won so much is that the Conservative share of the vote is even lower.
Yes, well, I think it was a catastrophically bad night for the Conservatives. They're going to have to rebuild. And I think we need to see the Conservative Party returning to Conservative values, principles and ideas. The party has shifted more to the centre ground under Rishi Sunak. That's alienated, I think, a lot of Conservative voters. Many went to reform, many stayed at home. This is certainly a party in a real sense of crisis, but I think it can rebuild itself. It can go through a period of regeneration. It needs the right leadership. If it moves, I think, to the left, as some are advocating, I think that would be disastrous for the party. If it moves rightwards and rediscovers its Thatcherite, Churchillian, roots, I do think that it can be a very successful party again. If you look at the Labour vote, just 35%, that's not exactly a massive endorsement. And I do think the Conservatives can come back 5 years from now, but they cannot continue the kind of Sunak-style wet politics that we've seen.
In some ways, listening to what Keir Starmer has said today, I want to be a government for all the people, not just those who voted for me. I remember back to 2019. It was in this very building. We're inside the QE2 Centre in Westminster. This is where Boris Johnson came upon winning that election. He held a sort of press event with a big banner behind him and Michael Gove and all sorts of others saying, "The people's government. We know that you've only lent us our votes and we'll do everything we can to maintain and repay that trust." Many people were saying that coalition that Boris Johnson built, a disparate coalition, northern voters, southern voters, rich voters, poor voters, all the rest of it, it was a broad anti-Corbyn coalition, but it was very, very brittle. I'm looking at this coalition that Keir Starmer's put together. North, south, rich, poor, a broad anti-Sunak coalition. But as soon as that big uniting factor of being anti-Tory goes away, Matthew, potentially that coalition can dissolve as quickly as Boris Johnson's.
Well, I think you're right, but I think the difference with Boris is that Boris's coalition was centred around an idea, which is getting Brexit done, whereas this coalition was centred around getting the Tories out. So that's an opportunity for Keir to define what his mission is and what he can get that coalition to unite around in government. I mean, in a way that perhaps hasn't been sort of central to how people chose how to vote yesterday. It was very tactical across the countries. You know, we've seen the great triumph for the Lib Dems, the Greens, etc., and even Plaid doubling its number of MPs from Wales.
Yeah, and it's right we turn to the Liberal Democrats now, because what an astonishing growth in numbers of seats. Not a growth in number of votes, but an astonishing growth in number of seats.
What we've seen since 2019, when our party, I think it's fair to be honest to say, was on the precipice. We've come back from there. We've taken a new strategy. We've looked at how our target voters think, how they feel, and actually we've really honed in and lasered in on that. And I think that has been recognised in numbers even we weren't expecting in the last 24 hours. I mean, 71 seats, and that's still with Inverness in play.
It could be 72.
It could be 72. I mean, this is... Inverness is Charles Kennedy's old seat. This is winning back Heartland, but it's also winning back winning home county seats we've never even touched before. We've got a new voter base that actually, as I think the Tories start to divide themselves over the next 2 years about what their future is, will be, strictly speaking, providing the real opposition to the new Labour government in Parliament.
Now, in Oxfordshire, for example, there's not a single Tory left. In the urban areas, it's Labour. In the rural areas, it's Liberal Democrat. It's similar, but not exactly the same in Cambridgeshire. We're looking at perhaps a displacement in some of these more well-to-do parts of the country, in the southwest as well, of the Conservatives for the Liberal Democrats. That means you've got a very different type of Member of Parliament there, perhaps compared to 2005 when you held a lot of inner cities. Does that mean the party will change, given who it's representing?
I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, to hit on your sort of 2005 point, we built our 97 to 2010 coalition of voters around this idea of community politics. You're well-to-do, hard-working local councillor who sort of works his way up and becomes an MP. We've got a very different category of MPs now. We've got Paul Kohler in Wimbledon. I mean, Paul Kohler's a law professor by trade. What's his background? He was on the Law Commission with Baroness Hale. These are serious professionals who can provide serious scrutiny to a Labour government, can really hold Labour's feet to the fire on issues like civil liberties, which we know the history of the Labour Party is not great on.
Ah, so this is interesting, not just on sort of the rural, perhaps, planning, countryside issues, sewage that you've been talking a lot, but actually if the Labour Party were to introduce ID cards or longer day detention and all of these sorts of things, that's where the Liberal Democrats could be talking again. We're going to come back to this a little bit later in the programme.